After a long trip through the islands to the east of Vardenfell, navigating the rocks and the numerous aggressive fish in the bay, you stumble upon a Daedric shrine. Out of curiosity, you decide to approach the crumbling old ruin, wanting to see if the shrine inside was still functional and if it was still even being worshipped at. As you walk through the shrine, you encounter a large sculpture, who says to you,
"Why do you summon me now? I have no time for your pleadings, weakling. I have other matters that need my attention."
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we will be discussing Molag Bal. More specifically, why would anyone worship Molag Bal? To do this, we will need to go over a few things. Firstly, who even is Molag Bal? Then, we will move on to discussing the history of Molag Bal. So Molag Bal's legacy. After this, we will discuss who worships Molag Bal and how do they worship him. And finally, we will move into discussing what has Molag Bal created, this being his realm of Cold Harbor, along with the creatures he has created. He has created more than just the vampires. All of this being done to get a clearer picture on why you may want to worship Molag Bal. To begin, we should discuss who Molag Bal really is. Molag Bal is one of the Daedric princes, who is considered to be part of the House of Troubles. The House of Troubles is a group of 4 Daedra that are considered to be the bad Daedra by the Dunmer people. Their purpose is to test mortals. Molag Bal's purpose in the House of Troubles, according to the Dunmer and Chimer, was to ruin the purity of their bloodlines. His realm in Oblivion primarily focuses on the enslavement and dominion over mortals. This realm is known as Cold Harbor. Now, Cold Harbor is known to be an apocalyptic version of Nirn. This realm is considered to be mostly lifeless. It is cold and dismal, being the literal embodiment of fear and exploitation. This is where the souls of vampires are sent after they die. With the focus of his realm being enslavement and dominion over mortals, it comes with a desire to collect the souls of every single mortal. The more souls he manages to get, the more souls he wants. This is to the point where he has done several questionable things, including taking part of Nirn to Oblivion to achieve this goal. One of the pieces of Nirn that Molag Bal was essentially able to drag into Cold Harbor was that of the Argonian village of Haj Uxith. During a time of great hardship for the Hist tribe, the Hist made a deal with Molag Bal, the Hist being a race of sentient tree and the Hist tribe being a group of Argonians who worshipped the tree at the center of their village. Molag Bal's appearance differs depending on several things, including religious depiction and just the artist, as well as when he's shown up. However, in every artistic depiction, he will always have horns, a tail, and a muscular body. Molag Bal himself has appeared in different ways on several occasions, the first being his appearance to a Blade's agent. In this occurrence, he appeared as a green-skinned humanoid, this figure having red eyes with elven ears, a long thin tail, along with both legs and the face of a goat. Whereas in his appearance at Gilvardell, Molag Bal appeared as a red-skinned giant with a rather large grin on his face. His appearance during the time of the plane meld, which we'll get into soon, is different again. Here, his skin has a bluish tint to it. His face resembles that of a skull, lightly covered with some sort of skin. His eyes are sunken in. He has very angular facial features, along with a muscular and sinewy body. He is covered in many horns or sorts of spikes. He is known by many names, each relating to a story, what his worshippers call him, or even what others worshipping different gods call him. Some of these names include the rather generic terms that most throughout Nirn refer to him as, these being things like God of Schemes, Harvester of Souls, Lord of Brutality, and the Lord of Domination. These all being a description of how the majority of people view him in Nirn. He has other nicknames though, these being things like the Dark Master, the Lord of Darkness, and the Dread Lord. Now these are just some of the names that are used by the minions and followers of Molag Bal, which in some cases could be considered nicer than what others call him. These other names can include Father of Undeath, Dark Father, Lord of the Undead. These names are more common amongst most vampires whether or not they worship Molag Bal. However, there are a small group of vampires, these being the Scions of LeMay. They call him the Defiler, King of Corruption and Father of Torment, this being due to who LeMay actually is. Now LeMay, or LeMay Bal, was a Daedric princess, and also the unwilling bride of Molag Bal. Because who doesn't want to marry a demonic god-man who smells like rotting flesh and has bad hygiene? Most people. So LeMay was forced to marry Molag Bal after he viciously assaulted her, then essentially causing her to become the first vampire. This is why she is known as his bride, or shall I say, unwilling bride. She would transform others into vampires, these being the scions of LeMay. But anyway, her group are not the only ones that have rather unkind names for him, with the Prince of Murder title also being one that the followers of his enemy, the Daedric Prince Meridia, used when talking about Molag Bal. This being done to highlight the rather unpleasant character that those who worship Meridia perceive Molag Bal to be. Now that we know about who Molag Bal is, we should move on to what is Molag Bal's legacy. So what historical events has he been involved in throughout the eras? For this, we should begin in the Merethic era, so the mythical era. In the middle to later part of the Merethic era, we would have the creation of LeMay Bal. Now, the story goes that LeMay Beolfag was a Daedric priestess for the god Arche, who is the god of creation, or the god of the circle of life. Now, Molag Bal was not a fan of the control that Arche had over the circle of life, with Molag Bal even dabbling in necromancy as his way of spiting him. This did not fully satisfy Molag Bal, so he decided to brutally assault one of the priestesses, this being LeMay. This was in the wild lands of Skyrim. A single drop of his own blood was shed, this landing on LeMay. Now, luckily for LeMay, she would be found abandoned by a group of nomadic Daedric people in her heavily injured comatose state. She would be taken in by this group and they would tend to her wounds. They, however, would notice something strange. LeMay was healing rather rapidly, especially considering the state that she was in when they found her. This horrified the nomads and they would attempt to cremate LeMay. With the cremation pyre being lit, LeMay would wake up in a state of undeath. She would wake from their attempted destruction of her rather disoriented, confused, and also incredibly mad, because they did kinda try and kill her. In this state, she would slaughter and feast upon the nomads, having a rampage as violent as Molag Bal's treatment of her. She would continue her rampage for a little while throughout Tamriel, this being the origin of the first lot of vampires. It is also suggested that this is the origin of the Lamia people, these being the serpentine half-women, half-snake creatures. But anyway, once LeMay would come to her senses, she would feel immense guilt and remorse over what she had done. She would pray to Arche for help, and he, of course, would ignore her. He had turned his back on her after all. So it was this moment she decided everything she would do from now on would be to spite both Molag Bal and Arche, as they had done this to her. This would lead to her founding her own vampire cult. But anyway, moving on, now into the First Era. This is where at some point in the early history of the Island of Solstice, there would be the city of Mor Neril, which happens to be a Daedric temple city. This, as you could have guessed, was dedicated to Molag Bal, and he used this site as a place to harvest the souls of mortals departing the mortal plane. Now, he did have several fans in Solstice. This includes Kin Lady Iniel Corellania of the Corellania clan. She was the leader of this clan. She learnt necromancy, magic, and in the year 723 of the First Era, she would attempt to conquer Solstice. Now, she would actually call upon Molag Bal in the year 853. This was during her clan's war against the Yukodans. Now, the use of necromancy in this war would actually cause a divide in her clan. Some disliked the calling upon of the Daedra, whereas others were all for it and would also take part in these practices. But either way, the Corellania clan would settle down and exist peacefully with the Argonians in Solstice eventually. Now, this era of peace and prosperity would last until Istamil Corellania would rise to power in the year 2631 in the First Era. Now, Istamil was known to be a tyrant kinlord. He would crush any who opposed him and his rule. After all, he did kill his brother for his position. So he was not exactly a popular leader. This would eventually lead to a civil war. But what does this civil war have to do with Molag Bal? Well, Istamil was desperate to stay in control and to silence his opposition, so he would head to the temple of Mornaril to request the assistance of Molag Bal. And boy did Molag Bal deliver. Not only did he provide Istamil with great necromantic powers, but he also provided him with legions of Daedra to squash anyone who dared to oppose him. The campaign would be pretty successful. He would manage to slaughter his enemies without any issue. That, of course, being until his cousin, Vinotilmo Corellania, would have enough of Istamil's blood-filled rampage. This is when Vinotilmo would get his own Daedric assistance, that being from the 3 Daedric queens, Azura, Meridia, and Nocturnal. With the assistance from these 3 Daedra, Vinotilmo would turn the tides of the war, and this would lead to his cousin, the Tyrant Kinlord, being killed, along with Mornaril being sealed up. And that would be the last of Molag Bal's interactions with the Corellania clan in the First Era. However, he would have interactions with other clans and other groups in this era. One of these being his deal with King Siraihi, also known as the Vampire of Verkath. He ruled over Verkath City and was the leader of the Grey Host. The Grey Host being an army of undead and lycanthropic creatures. Now King Siraihi and Molag Bal would create an agreement, and this agreement would eventually lead to 13 of the Grey Host exarchs, which is sort of like governors, to be sent to Cold Harbor. Now, were these 13 treated kindly and warmly welcomed? No. This is Molag Bal we are talking about, so definitely not. They were sent there to be tortured for all of eternity by the Daedric prince. This would be until the Second Era with Rada al-Saran, who was the last known surviving leader of the Grey Host. He sought out to free himself and his kin who were trapped in Cold Harbor. This was in the year 582 in the Second Era. This would be with the help of the Ice Reach Coven. They would create magical storms known as Harrow Storms. These would suck the soul out of any living being caught in them and swap them out for Rada's fallen brothers. However, Rada would not be as successful as he hoped. Anyway, back to the First Era, as Molag Bal would have involvement in several other events during this time. This including with the use of his Maelstrom of Bal, which is essentially a sort of whirlpool in the middle of the ocean. So in the year 2260, during the All-Flag Navy fight with the Slode, the All-Flag Navy would win this war. However, there would be consequences. With the Coral Tower of the Slode falling, the Maelstrom of Bal would claim a large portion of the All-Flag Navy's fleet. This fleet would sink in the Abyssinian Sea and would be transported into Cold Harbor. But Molag Bal would strike a deal with the admiral of the fleet. He would give them the Crown of Bones, allowing them control over the sailors of the sunken ships. Now, this would not be the last time in the First Era he would claim the souls of mortals in Tamriel. No, we would also have the destruction of Gilvardel in the year 2290. This was after he was summoned by the king of Sanchel, Drozel. He would summon Molag Bal after an interaction with a Bosmeri bard, and he would have Molag Bal destroy the city. King Drozel is known to be a bit of a mad king, to say the very least. With the destruction of Gilvardel, Molag Bal would take all of the souls of those inhabiting the city on that day. This would lead to the Cold Harbor Compact. This is where Sutha Sil would summon several Daedra, including Molag Bal, to a meeting in Cold Harbor to get them to agree to stop meddling in the affairs of mortals directly. Now, we move on to the Second Era. This is when we see in the year 582, Molag Bal's attempt to merge Nirn with Cold Harbor. This plan being called the Plain Meld. Now this involved a large Daedric invasion of Tamriel along with dark anchors that were supposed to drag the mortal plane into his own realm. With every death occurring in Nirn, this would weaken what was already a thinning barrier between Cold Harbor and Nirn, making it easier for his plan to succeed. However, there was one thing he had not accounted for, this being the Vestige along with Meridia's assistance. They would grind this attempt at the mortal plane domination to a halt. But this would not be the only attempt to take over the mortal plane in the Second Era. No, Molag Bal was a little too ambitious for that. This is where we would see the Imperial City become a key player. The Imperial City, which had already been infiltrated by Molag Bal's forces, is where he used a Zivkin by the name of Malak Kenna to impersonate a regent empress by the name of Clivia Tharn, who actually happened to already be dead. Molag Kenna was sent there to take an Elder Scroll so they could use it to pull the mortal plane into Cold Harbor. This of course being foiled by the Vestige along with a priestess who knew about what was on the scroll and what would be needed to prevent Nian becoming another part of Cold Harbor. Now we move on to Molag Bal's interactions with the House of Gardner. So before the House of Gardner fell, Princess Violetta would use the Birdsong Tower as the place to hold her beautiful gardens. The tower was filled with beautiful flowers and the chirping of lovely birds. But would Molag Bal enjoy such beauty and joy? No. Instead, he would actually find it offensive and disgusting. This would lead to him sending a plague of undeath to the tower, which led to it becoming known as Soul Shriven Tower. Molag Bal would curse yet another place in the Second Era, as it was seemingly his era. This occurred when the town of Westry was invaded by Nord raiders, and a priest of Stendar would pray to Stendar to help, who was known as the God of Mercy among other things. But Stendar would not answer his call. No, instead it would be Molag Bal. So the priest would of course beg Molag Bal for his help. And because Molag Bal hates anything he could see as a weakness, which begging for help when your village is being invaded could be seen as weakness, Molag Bal would be so kind to curse the village with undeath. Kind of his thing. Now, not everything Molag Bal would do in this era could be considered, well, evil. So during the Second Era again, Manimarco, the god of worms, would serve Molag Bal. However, during this time working for Molag Bal, he would have his own ulterior motives. Manimarco wanted to be more than just the god of worms. He wanted to take Molag Bal's throne as the god of brutality, the enslaver of mortals. He planned to trap Molag Bal's essence in the most powerful soul gem to ever exist. But this plan would be ruined right before Plane Meld would be stopped. And as a reward for his bad behavior, Manimarco would be doomed to an eternity of being punished in Cold Harbor. Now we move into the Third Era. In this era, Molag Bal takes more of a step back and allows others to do his dirty work. This beginning in the year 405 with an agent of the Blades being sent on a mission to kill a heretic mage who had been drawing on the power of Molag Bal without actually being a worshipper of the Daedra. For their work in the assassination plot, the agent would be gifted a mace, this being the Mace of Molag Bal. This would not be the only time Molag Bal would delegate assassinations to various visitors to his shrines. As in the year 427, in the Third Era, Molag Bal would also ask for the assistance of the Neravharin, over in Morrowind of course.
Why do you summon me now? I have no time for your pleadings, weakling. I have other matters that need my attention. Enter now. He will pay for his insolence. Listen well. Those in my service will do my bidding, or they will suffer eternal torment. You will serve me, mortal.
Now Mentenar was previously a favoured Daedroth, being an important general during the Plane Meld, which is part of the reason why he was sent to Morrowind to wreak havoc upon Tamriel. But he of course would grow lazy and decide a cozy retirement, which is why you find him chilling out in Corridor, not following his orders. Now Molag Bal wished Mentenar be sent back to Oblivion to be punished for eternity, this being through the work of the Neravharin killing Mentenar. And finally the last event in the Third Era, purely being for Molag Bal's enjoyment. This is when the hero of Kvatch, during the Oblivion Crisis, is told to taunt a pacifist into killing them. Now we move on to the Fourth Era in the year 201. This is when Molag Bal would haunt a home within the city of Markarth. The strangeness of this would attract both a priest who worships Stendar and the last Dragonborn to the home in an attempt to help its residents. This is where the priest and the last Dragonborn would of course become trapped, forced to fight to the death by Molag Bal for their freedom. The Dragonborn would be victorious against the priest, and Molag Bal would see this as them proving themselves to the Daedric prince. For this, the Dragonborn would be sent on a quest. They would be asked to capture the soul of a priest of Boetia who had been frequenting Molag Bal's shrine, not to worship it, but to desecrate it. Now we should move on to who worships Molag Bal and how is he worshipped. There are several races and groups who worship Molag Bal. This is rather interesting considering his desire to enslave mortals, but each group has their own reason for worshipping this prince. With the Ultima, one specific clan known as the Coralania clan, had Molag Bal as one of their primary Daedra that they worshipped. They, as seen in history, would call upon Molag Bal in times of war, whenever they needed strength or if they needed to defend their livelihoods. This did, however, change after a while, being due to Istamil and his hordes of Daedra killing all who opposed him. There were also the Aelid elves, specifically those in the city of Abargalas, as he was the patron deity of this city. The Aelid called him by another name, this being Molag Bal, and Molag Bal rather liked this group, considering that the king of Abargalas, Anumaril, was gifted an army of undead and the knowledge of how to construct a weapon known as the Mortem Vivicus to kill and harness souls, converting them into worshippers of Molag Bal. This city, in return, after their plan was found out, being destroyed of course by Meridia. It can now be found in Cold Harbor. The inhabitants still worship him in death. Now, there are still more groups who worship Molag Bal, including some Reachman clans. Now, the Reachman view Molag Bal as a god who represents hardship. He brings trouble and tests people. The Reach people believe that this is done as a way to teach people to endure. The names they use for Molag Bal represents this, as they call him He Who Schemes in the Shadows, the Defiler, and Father of Torment. If you look into certain clans, like the Cinder Heart clan, their practices, especially those surrounding Molag Bal, could be seen as very representative of this Daedra, this specifically being during their Briar Heart rituals. Now, Briar Hearts or Briar Warriors are warriors who have undergone a ritual to replace their heart with a poisoned Briar Heart seed, as a way of enhancing their warrior skills and to become a better protector for their clan. However, the Cinder Heart clan take this process one step further. Now, this process is already painful, as their chest cavity is literally being opened and their heart is being replaced by a cursed seed. But this clan, during the opening of the chest, fill the chest cavity with hot coals, just to add a little insult to injury. This is not the only example of the Cinder Heart clan having a fondness for the extreme, as part of their worshipping practices and behaviour. This clan is known for being especially cruel when it comes to people they have captured, often burning them alive, as a sort of human sacrifice, or just a way to get rid of captured people. Now, in general, there are specific members of the Reachman clans who are necromancers that work with Molag Bal. Now, these necromancers are known as grave singers. Now, a grave singer is able to command the dead through the use of bloodthorn vines as a way of controlling these dead. However, this is not without problem, as these necromancers having this skill can lead to them decaying. I know, lovely. Considering Molag Bal's interest in the undead and the suffering, he is rather encouraging of the Reachman's behaviour. Other groups worshipping Molag Bal are considered to be a little less brutal, like the Maoromar or Sea Elves. Now, not all Sea Elves invoke Molag Bal, but certain groups, like the Kill Cutters, which happen to be slave traders, do worship Molag Bal. This being particularly relevant considering that Molag Bal is god of enslavement of mortals. Anyway, when it comes to the actual worshipping aspect of Molag Bal, many of these groups from different races worship him in a similar way. They all take part in similar practices, these being live sacrifice of unwilling participants, of course, as a way to please Molag Bal. This being in part due to the belief of those who worship Molag Bal that the strong must punish the weak. Necromancy is also often a tool used in his worship, as Molag Bal began the practice of undead to spite the god Arkay for having control over the circle of life. With the various groups worshipping Molag Bal, other somewhat questionable practices can be seen as a tool of worship, as he does approve of deceit, deception, and cunning behaviours to do what needs to be achieved, which is where we can see actions like bribery, blackmail, and extortion all being viewed as acceptable within certain clans, along with other groups like the Fen Witches of Hjalmarch participating in things like kidnapping to increase their numbers. Again, this is to worship Molag Bal and keep their coven going. Now we should move on to discuss Molag Bal's various creations. The first of these being, of course, his realm in Oblivion, Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor is, as its name suggests, unnaturally cold and dark. It is filled with blackened ruins. But not only does the realm look haunting, it also smells that way. It is described as rapidly switching between a floral type of perfume smell and the smell of rotting dead creatures inhabiting the realm. Lovely. Now, most mortals inhabiting the realm are some sort of undead creature, but there are few groups of mortals that are not just the mindless undead. This including the Argonians in the Haj Uxith settlement, along with various animals like Netch, who seem to do well in Cold Harbor, surprisingly. For the creature side of Molag Bal's creations, we should actually discuss his involvement with the Imperial prison in the Second Era in the year 582. Molag Bal's forces would take over the prison, turning many of the Imperial Legion forces into traitors who worked for him. Now, this is not the creatures he created. No, these creatures would instead be from the prisoners held captive in the prison, along with citizens of the Imperial city. They would be sent to the flesh sculptor within the prison. Here, they would be turned into several creatures. In some cases, they would be turned into a mind shriven, which are essentially a creature that can be a person, animal, or Daedra who have had their will and mentality stolen by Molag Bal. These mind shriven essentially being a sort of puppet for Molag Bal. Others would be turned into carriers of disease in an attempt to allow him to take over the city and eventually all of Nairn. Now, Molag Bal would also create his creatures in a place known as the Vile Laboratory. In this laboratory, he would create two Daedric creatures, these being the Zivkin and the Daedric Titan. Now, the Zivkin are known as a breed of highly intelligent Daedra that are a hybrid between two different Daedra, these being the Dremora and the Zivilai. They are humanoid in appearance with blue-grey skin and horns, along with their sunken-in, icy blue eyes, which are of course similar to that of Molag Bal's, as they are one that mostly resembles him, not only in physical features but also in personality. They basically hate mortals and enjoy tormenting them. They also don't really like most other Daedra. Now, with the Daedric Titan, or Titans as they are often referred to, they are instead a more beast-based race. They were created to imitate dragons. These Titans are giant winged creatures, but in some cases they do not have wings, this being the shackled Titans, as they have had their wings removed as a form of punishment. Another interesting creation, or shall I say group of creations, these being his monster children. Now, these were technically a joint effort, this being with a not as well-knowing Vivek. Yes, as it turns out, these two were briefly married for a time, because even the decaying Molag Bal can turn up the romance if asked. But anyway, Molag Bal would use the body of Vivek to create super monsters, this process taking 88 days. When Vivek's head would return, he would realize that the pomegranates and ceremony had really just been a ploy to create these monsters, and Vivek would kill most of them. However, 8 would manage to escape. These 8 being Moon Axle, Treasurewood Sword, Water Mountain, Pocket Cabal, Ruddy Man, City Face, Lyrock, and Golga Morgil. Now, Vivek was not exactly keen on his poorly behaved and terribly named children, so he would go kill them all. They were not exactly Molag Bal's most long-lived creations. Now we should move on to Molag Bal's most well-known creations. These are perhaps that of the vampires. Now, the first vampire we know is Lemay. However, she would not be the only mortal who he would turn into a vampire. But he does not transform just anyone into a vampire. You have to be powerful and impressive in your own right before Molag Bal even considers trusting you with the gift of vampirism. Those who are given the gift of vampirism directly from Molag Bal are known as pure-blooded vampires. These pure-blooded vampires are much more powerful than other vampires and also have higher status than others who get their powers from pure-blooded vampires and just further down the line. Even with other forms of vampires, there are many bloodlines and many different strains of vampirism, each causing some slight differences, like the wet fang vampires of Black Marsh being considered to be more intelligent than the other vampires in all of Tamriel. So now that we know who Molag Bal is, what his legacy is, who worships him, along with his various creations, we can now answer the question, why would anyone worship Molag Bal? Well, when it comes to his long history interacting with various groups, those who worshipped him and willingly followed his orders were often rewarded immensely. This does not apply to those who were converted to his worship under fear or coercion, like the members of Legion Zero. Now, not all of the foot soldiers in this were, I guess you could say, capable of making their own decisions, as they, if they were somewhat reluctant or less than loving of their new leader, they would become mind shrivens. However, for those who actually joined Molag Bal willingly and worked for him and were considered to be impressive, he is rather willing to reward people. We see one of these rewards being that of becoming one of the select few to be a pure-blooded vampire. Not only does it come with power, but it comes with status. Amongst most types of vampires, not only are you more closer in relation to Molag Bal, but you are also more capable than others. Even to those who are not given the gift of vampirism, he does offer other blessings, like we see in the case of Istamil Corolania. Now this tyrant was well liked by Molag Bal, to the point where Istamil requested help from the Daedra. He provided enough to crush anyone who looked at him in an undesirable way. So he does provide benefits to those who worship him during life, even if this does come at a potential cost, like that we see in the afterlife of the members of the Grey Host. Yes, their leader, King Styriki, had made a deal with Molag Bal, which would doom himself and all of those in his army that fell in battle be tormented for eternity in Cold Harbor. So to answer why anyone may worship Molag Bal, he provides almost unlimited power to those who seek it, as long as they do not concern themselves with the consequences which occur once they die. Thank you for watching. This series has been more popular than I could have ever expected, so if you want to request a Daedra or give me some feedback, put it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then you should check out this one. It is about Hyacinth, god of the hunt, another Daedra, and why you may want to worship him.